I never thought I'd be sitting here typing this story, but here I am, sharing what has been one of the darkest chapters of my life. It's hard to admit, but my wife, Melissa, cheated on me with the manager of our favorite vacation resort. Yeah, the place we've spent countless weekends and family vacations. I guess that's what hurts the most, knowing that where we made so many memories was the backdrop for her betrayal. Let me give you a bit of context. Melissa and I had been together for almost a decade. We were that couple that everyone envied, at least that's what I thought. We had a nice house, good jobs, and a couple of amazing kids. Life was predictable, but we had our routines that worked for us. I was the breadwinner, working my ass off in a corporate job, while she balanced her part-time work as a yoga instructor and being a mom. I thought we understood each other, but the signs of trouble began creeping in slowly, like a door left ajar. It started with the late nights. At first, I thought she was just busy with her yoga classes or hanging out with friends. But then there were the text, short, evasive replies when I'd ask what she was up to. "Just finished a class, babe, relaxing with some friends," she'd say while I'd be at home managing the chaos with the kids. I wanted to trust her, but something felt off. Then there was that weekend getaway plan with our kids. Melissa was unusually giddy about it, which felt strange. I mean, who gets that excited about a family trip? I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. But deep down, my instincts were screaming. The final straw was when I found an unfamiliar perfume on her clothes when she came home one night. It was floral and sweet, not the scent she usually wore. I asked her about it and she scoffed, claiming it was just a sample she got from a friend. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But my gut told me otherwise and I had to figure it out. That's when I got the idea to do some digging. I went through her phone when she was taking a shower one day, and let me tell you, what I found shocked me to my core. Text. Messages between her and the resort manager, Adam, were just sitting there, flirty exchanges, emojis that made my skin crawl, and plans for secret meetings. In one message, she even referred to him as my paradise. I felt my heart drop. Confronting her was like stepping into a minefield. When she came out of the shower, I couldn't hold back. "Melissa, we need to talk." Her face went pale as I pulled up the messages. The look in her eyes, pure denial mixed with that self-righteousness she often carried. "You've got it all wrong, those are just jokes," she exclaimed, but her voice shook. I felt rage boiling inside me. Why was she lying? Why was she so determined to deny something so clearly in front of her? I demanded the truth, and after what felt like an eternity of dodging, her walls finally crumbled. "Okay, fine. I had a fling with Adam, but it didn't mean anything," she finally admitted, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and sadness. Those words twisted the knife deeper. I felt the betrayal wash over me like a tidal wave, and I could barely breathe. How could she do this? To us, to our family. The emotional fallout was brutal. I swung from disbelief to anger, then to despair. I was devastated, feeling like the ground beneath me had just vanished. I loved this woman, and now I was scrambling to pick up the pieces of my shattered trust. I watched her try to justify her actions, but nothing she said made sense. How do you reconcile love with betrayal? I felt trapped in this emotional whirlwind, a cocktail of pain and anger, and I didn't know how to escape. I needed a plan, something to regain control over this chaos. I thought about what I could do next. Would I fight to save the marriage, or would I take the plunge and seek revenge on the man who stole my wife? I was consumed by thoughts of how to retaliate against Adam, the very man who had taken my happiness and turned it into a joke. That's when I began to devise a plan, not just for revenge, but for my own sanity. It was time to make sure that neither he nor she could enjoy their paradise ever again. I had a destination in mind, a way to even the scales. I took a deep breath, pushed aside the pain, and began plotting my next move. Little did Melissa know, I wouldn't let this betrayal slide without consequences. After the confrontation with Melissa, I felt like I was living in a fog. Everything was a blur of emotions, and I was caught in this strange limbo between anger and betrayal. While she was trying to piece together her excuses and reasons, I was focused on something entirely different. The thought of revenge against Adam consumed my mind. The guy was the worst kind of opportunist, someone who took advantage of my trusting nature and my wife's vulnerabilities. I decided to play it cool for a while. I needed to gather information on Adam and figure out how to approach this. I imagined him frolicking in his paradise, the resort manager living it up while I was left to pick up the pieces. I couldn't let that continue. I needed to act, but I also wanted to make sure I did it right. I started visiting the resort more frequently, using it as an excuse to bring the kids for a weekend getaway. I'd stroll around the property, pretending to check in at the front desk, taking mental notes about how everything worked and keeping an eye out for Adam. I wanted to see the man who had shattered my life, and I wanted to understand how things ran behind the scenes. The more I learned, the more I felt like a detective playing a twisted game. One evening, I decided to take a walk around the resort after dinner. I spotted Adam chatting with some guests near the pool. From a distance, I watched him laugh, leaning into that charm that had so easily captivated Melissa. He was a tall guy, athletic, with a confident aura. I felt a surge of anger bubbling inside me. In that moment, I could almost feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I plotted my revenge. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I reached out to friends and acquaintances who frequented the resort. I learned more about Adam's background, his management style, the way he interacted with guests, and most importantly, his track record. It turned out that he had a history of unprofessional behavior. A few whispers about complaints from other couples about how he blurred the lines between manager and friend came to my ears. This was the ammunition I needed. With this newfound information, I formulated a plan. I would file a formal complaint about him, but I wasn't going to stop there. I decided to gather statements from people who had experienced his inappropriate behavior and contact the resort's higher-ups. It was a risky move, but I felt empowered by the idea of taking back control of my life. The first step was crafting the complaint. I spent hours drafting it, making sure it was detailed and precise. I included everything I had found out about other guests' experiences alongside my own narrative. I wanted to make sure that the management couldn't brush it off as just another disgruntled customer. The goal was to ensure he faced consequences not just from me, but also from the people he had wronged over time. Once I felt confident in my complaint, I submitted it through the resort's official channels. I anxiously waited for a response. I couldn't let Melissa know what I was up to. I wanted to keep her completely in the dark. I could only imagine her reaction if she found out I was executing a plan against the man she had cheated on me with. I wanted to savor that bittersweet moment when the truth would finally hit her. Days turned into weeks, and I felt like every waking moment was consumed by this plan. Melissa continued her routine, and though I could see the guilt occasionally creeping onto her face, she would quickly brush it aside, insisting she wanted to work things out. I couldn't help but scoff at her attempts to rebuild our relationship. How could we move forward when everything felt so fundamentally broken? I didn't let her see the turmoil I was wrestling with. I presented a calm facade, but inside, I was plotting my next move. The day I received the call from the resort's management was a pivotal moment. They wanted to meet with me, to discuss my complaint and the allegations I had made against Adam. I felt a rush of exhilaration and dread. This was it, my chance to expose him and take back the control he had so casually ripped away from me. When the day of the meeting arrived, I wore my best poker face, ready to face whatever came my way. I wanted to present myself as a respectable husband and father who had been wronged, rather than a man driven by revenge. As I sat in the conference room with the resort's human resources manager, I felt like I was finally taking steps towards reclaiming my dignity. I carefully laid out my case, detailing Adam's inappropriate messages, the complaints from other guests, and how his actions had impacted my family. The HR manager listened intently, taking notes, while I could feel a sense of satisfaction building inside me. I knew I was making an impact, and the thought of Adam getting pulled into this mess made me smile internally. As the meeting concluded, I left feeling lightheaded. I had done it. I had taken a stand. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease about how all of this would affect Melissa. Would she be angry? Would she finally understand the gravity of what she had done? I had no answers, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the passive husband she thought I was. I was ready to fight back, no matter the cost. The next steps would determine everything, and I was prepared for whatever fallout would come. The aftermath of my meeting with the resort management was a swirling mix of satisfaction and anxiety. I felt like I was dancing on the edge of a blade, and I knew that this was just the beginning. I had taken a decisive step against Adam, but the real challenge would be how to handle the fallout with Melissa and the consequences of my actions. As I returned home, I couldn't help but replay the meeting in my mind. The HR manager had promised to conduct a thorough investigation, and I hoped it would lead to Adam facing repercussions for his actions. But I also knew that once this ball got rolling, there would be no stopping it. I was about to stir the pot in ways I never fully anticipated. The atmosphere at home was tense. Melissa could sense something was different. I was quieter, more reserved. She kept probing, trying to draw out what was bothering me, but I kept my lips sealed tight. I wasn't ready to reveal my plan, not yet. I wanted to see how the investigation unfolded and how it would affect her before I dropped the bombshell. Then came the phone call I had been waiting for. The resort management wanted to meet with me again. They had conducted some preliminary interviews, and it looked like they were taking my complaint seriously. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. I was ready to walk into that meeting, but I was also acutely aware that my marriage was hanging by the thinnest of threads. When I got to the resort this time, the air felt charged with tension. I was escorted into a different conference room, where the HR manager and a few other executives awaited me. Their expressions were solemn, and I knew this was serious. They began by thanking me for bringing the situation to their attention and assured me that they had already begun taking action regarding Adam. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. "I just want to see accountability for what he's done." They explained that they had spoken with several guests who corroborated my claims about Adam's inappropriate behavior. The manager's charm turned out to be a facade, hiding a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. Hearing this was like a weight lifting off my shoulders, but I also felt the familiar pang of sadness for how deep this betrayal cut. Adam has been put on administrative leave pending further investigation, they continued. "We want to ensure that all guests feel safe and respected at our resort." The words washed over me like cold water. I didn't just want him gone. I wanted him to feel the full weight of the consequences for his choices. I wanted him to know that his actions had real impact, not just on my life, but on all those he had disrespected. I left that meeting feeling a sense of vindication. But I also knew that the next step would be the hardest, confronting Melissa about everything I had uncovered. When I returned home, the tension was palpable. Melissa was waiting for me, her eyes filled with questions. I could see the worry etched on her face, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy. But that quickly evaporated as I remembered the gravity of her betrayal. I needed to be strong, I had to stand my ground. "Can we talk?" she asked cautiously, a hint of desperation in her voice. I nodded, motioning for her to sit down. "I need you to be honest with me, Melissa," I said, taking a deep breath. "I've done some digging into what happened with you and Adam. I know more than you think." Her eyes widened and I could see the color drain from her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I filed a complaint against him. The management is taking it seriously. He's on administrative leave right now," I revealed, watching her reaction closely. For a moment she was silent. I saw the gears turning in her mind, processing what I had just said. Then she snapped. "You had no right to do that. This is all just a misunderstanding. I told you it didn't mean anything." Her voice rose and I could feel the fury radiating from her. "No right? You think I have no right to defend my family after what you did? You brought this on yourself, Melissa." I shot back, my anger boiling over. She looked at me, her facade cracking. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. "I thought I could have fun without hurting you." "Fun? You think cheating on your husband is fun? What kind of twisted logic is that?" I couldn't believe the audacity of her excuses. It was infuriating, and I felt my heart race as I continued to confront her. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was a sight I couldn't muster any sympathy for. Then why did you let it happen? You chose to betray us, to betray our family. You don't get to play the victim here, I said, my voice steady but laced with pain. In that moment, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. I could either continue down this tumultuous path of anger and resentment, or I could find a way to put the pieces of my life back together, without her. The thought of separation lingered in my mind, but I was also aware of the emotional toll it would take on our kids. After that confrontation, the dynamic at home shifted. Melissa seemed to realize that this time I wasn't going to just let it slide. The power she once held over me was slipping away. She became desperate, trying to earn forgiveness through apologies and empty promises, but it felt hollow. I couldn't forget what she had done. I decided to give myself time to think, to process my feelings. I began reaching out to friends for support, sharing my story with those I trusted. I needed to hear their perspectives, to know if I was being unreasonable or if my feelings were valid. I was surprised by the overwhelming support I received. Everyone I spoke to echoed the same sentiment. I deserved better. As time passed, I realized that this wasn't just about revenge on Adam. It was a wake-up call for me too. I had to decide whether I wanted to fight for a marriage built on betrayal or start fresh. Each day brought me closer to a conclusion, and while the thought of leaving Melissa was painful, I knew I had to prioritize my happiness. I had endured enough heartache, and it was time to reclaim my life. But before any final decisions could be made, I had to see how the investigation unfolded and what the repercussions would be for both Melissa and Adam. I was ready to face the consequences of my actions, no matter where they led. The storm was far from over. The weeks that followed my confrontation with Melissa were a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty. I had unleashed a storm by filing the complaint against Adam, but the fallout was weighing heavily on my mind. As news of the investigation reached its conclusion, I knew I had to brace myself for the avalanche of consequences that was about to descend on my life. One evening, I received an email from the resort management, requesting my presence for a final meeting regarding their investigation into Adam. I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. This was the moment where everything would come together or fall apart. I made my way back to the resort, replaying every detail in my mind. I was ready to see justice served, but I also dreaded how this would alter the already precarious state of my marriage with Melissa. When I arrived at the resort, I was escorted to the same conference room where we had previously met. The HR manager greeted me with a serious expression, and I knew right away that this was not going to be a light conversation. I took a seat and prepared myself for the news. "Thank you for coming back, and thank you for your patience throughout this process," the manager began. "We take these matters very seriously, and we want to ensure you have a full understanding of the actions we've taken." As he outlined the findings of their investigation, my heart raced. They had interviewed several guests, corroborating my claims about Adam's inappropriate behavior. It turned out there were multiple reports from other couples about his flirty demeanor, leading them to believe he had crossed professional boundaries on several occasions. Hearing this felt like a vindication of my suffering. "Based on our findings, we are terminating Adam's employment with us effective immediately," the manager said, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "We've also implemented new training protocols for our staff to ensure this does not happen again." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unresolved feelings. I didn't want to celebrate too much, knowing the emotional turmoil that still loomed back at home. As I left the resort, I couldn't help but feel an odd sense of closure. Adam wouldn't be able to charm anyone in the same way again. But the victory felt hollow when I thought about Melissa, who was still home, grappling with the consequences of her betrayal. I had taken decisive action against the man who had crossed a line, but now I had to confront the reality of what that meant for my marriage. When I walked through the front door, I found Melissa sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn and anxious. She had been waiting for me to return, and the look in her eyes spoke volumes. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, preparing myself to deliver the news. "They terminated Adam's employment. He's gone," I said, watching for her reaction. For a moment there was silence. Then she let out a breath she seemed to be holding. I can't believe it," she replied, looking stunned. "What does this mean for us?" I had anticipated that question, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "It means we need to talk," I replied, my voice steady. "We can't just gloss over what happened, Melissa. This has to change everything." The tension in the room escalated. "I know I messed up. I've said I'm sorry a million times," she cried, her voice cracking. "What do you want from me? I want you to understand the gravity of what you've done. You had an affair and it affected our entire family. I'm not sure how to move forward." I saw her eyes well up with tears and I felt a pang of guilt, but I couldn't allow it to sway me. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It was a mistake. I was lost and confused," she pleaded, frustration creeping into her tone. "I thought we were okay." "Okay? You think lying and sneaking around is okay? You didn't consider how this would affect me or the kids." The anger I had tried to suppress now surged forth, and I felt like I was fighting to keep my sanity intact. Melissa began to cry, her shoulders shaking with emotion. "I'll do anything to make it right. I want to fix this. I love you," she exclaimed, reaching out for my hand. Love. It was a word I had heard thrown around so easily in that moment. But could love truly survive such betrayal? I pulled my hand away, creating distance between us, my heart feeling heavy. "Love isn't enough when trust is broken. You have to understand that," I said firmly. We spent the next hour discussing everything: our marriage, our children, the future. I listened to her attempts to justify her actions, but the hurt ran too deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still just a player in her game, one that had spiraled out of control. I needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. "I think we need space," I finally said, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. "I need to figure out if this can be repaired or if it's time to let go." "Space," she echoed, her voice breaking again. "You can't be serious. We're a family." That word family hit me hard. I loved our children more than anything, but I was also aware that staying in a broken marriage would only set a poor example for them. I couldn't let my emotional turmoil taint their lives. "I need to do what's best for me right now," I replied, my tone firm but pained. "And I think that means reevaluating everything." With those words, I walked away from the kitchen, leaving Melissa in tears. I felt torn apart inside, knowing that I had hurt her, but also realizing that I had to prioritize my own mental health. I needed clarity, a chance to breathe without the constant weight of regret and betrayal hanging over my head. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating the future. It was a chance to start anew or to salvage what was left of our marriage. I needed to make decisions that would not only impact my life but also shape the lives of my children. As the dawn broke, I knew I had a long road ahead of me. The decision to take space was just the beginning, but it felt like the first step towards reclaiming my life. I was determined to find out what I truly wanted and what was worth fighting for in the wreckage of our marriage. The storm had passed, but the aftermath would require careful navigation. I was ready to face whatever came next. The days turned into weeks after I decided to take space from Melissa. The initial shock of the affair had dulled somewhat, but the pain still lingered like a persistent ache. I focused on my work and the kids, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in our chaotic lives. Yet, every time I glanced at Melissa, I was reminded of the betrayal that had shattered our world. I didn't want to wallow in despair. I was determined to find clarity. I began seeing a therapist to help unravel the emotional knots I found myself in. It felt good to talk to someone impartial about everything that had happened, someone who could help me sort through my feelings without judgment. I poured out my heart about the love I once felt for Melissa and how that had been tainted by her actions. The therapist encouraged me to reflect on what I truly wanted moving forward. Did I want to try to rebuild this marriage, or was it time to let go? I mulled over those questions during each session, grappling with the conflicting emotions that came with them. Part of me still cared for Melissa and wanted to believe that We could work things out, but another part of me felt that trust had been irreparably damaged. As I worked through my feelings, I also made an effort to spend more quality time with the kids. They were my anchor, and the innocence of their laughter brought me a sense of peace. I wanted to be the best father I could be for them, regardless of what was happening with Melissa. Our weekends were filled with outdoor adventures, family movie nights, and simple activities like baking cookies together. It was a reminder of the joy that still existed in my life, even amidst the turmoil. Every so often, I would check in with Melissa. Her apologies never seemed to stop, and while I appreciated her willingness to communicate, each conversation also brought back the memories of her betrayal. She would express her love and regret, insisting she was committed to making things right, but I always found myself questioning whether I could ever trust her again. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. It was time to have a deeper conversation with Melissa to define where we stood now. That I had taken time to reflect. I needed to know whether it was worth investing in our marriage or if it was time to move on for good. As I walked into the living room, I found her sitting on the couch, lost in thought. "Can we talk?" I asked, my heart racing as I prepared for this crucial moment. "Of course," she replied, her voice laced with hope. I took a seat across from her, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened between us, and I've also been working through my feelings in therapy," I started, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'm still hurt, and I don't think that will ever fully go away, but I also need to be honest about what I want." "I'll do anything to make it right," she quickly interjected, her eyes pleading. "I love you. I'm so sorry for everything." "I know you're sorry, and I believe you want to fix this," I replied, trying to temper her enthusiasm with the reality of our situation. "But just saying you're sorry won't change. What happened? Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight." Her expression shifted as I continued. "I need to understand whether you truly grasp the impact of your actions. Can you commit to doing the hard work it takes to heal our marriage? I don't want just empty promises. I want to see real change." Melissa nodded vigorously, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want to prove to you that I can be better. I've already started going to therapy myself. I want to understand why I did what I did." Hearing her say that gave me a sliver of hope, but I was cautious. "This journey isn't going to be easy, and I won't tolerate any more lies. I need to see consistency in your actions moving forward. You need to be transparent with me." "Absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes," she promised, her voice firm. We continued to talk late into the night, discussing our fears, our dreams, and what we wanted from our life together. I felt a flicker of the connection we once shared, but it was still buried under an avalanche of doubt. I knew that real change would take time, but the conversation felt like a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, things shifted in our household. Melissa worked hard to show me she was committed to rebuilding our relationship. She became more involved with the kids, and we began to establish new routines where we made an effort to communicate more openly. We even started going to couples therapy together, which was a big step for both of us. Yet, even as we began to mend the cracks, I found myself grappling with an unsettling feeling. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, constantly on edge, and worried that one misstep would send everything crashing down again. I didn't want to live in that state of anxiety, but it was hard to shake off the memories of betrayal. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Melissa turned to me with a serious expression. "I want to be honest about something," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I need to reach out to Adam to tell him to stay away from us. I don't want him to have any power over our lives anymore." I nodded, appreciating her desire to take control of the situation. "That makes sense. I think it's important for you to establish those boundaries. Just be clear with him about how serious this is." She agreed, and I felt a small sense of relief knowing she was taking proactive steps. I wanted her to reclaim her independence from the affair while also showing that she was committed to moving forward in a healthier way. But as she prepared to reach out to Adam, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I wondered how he would react and whether he would just brush her off or try to reinsert himself into her life. The thought of him lingering in the background made my stomach churn. The day she planned to contact him arrived, and I could sense the tension in the air. I watched her pace back and forth, and I felt a mix of apprehension and support. "You've got this," I said, trying to encourage her. "Just be firm about your boundaries." She nodded, taking a deep breath as she picked up her phone. I could see her fingers trembling as she typed out the message, pouring everything she felt into her words. I wanted to believe this would be the final step in reclaiming our lives from the shadow of the affair. As she hit send, I hoped that this moment would provide us both with a sense of closure. But deep down, I knew we still had a long way to go. The past wouldn't just disappear overnight, and the journey to rebuild trust would take time and effort. But at that moment, I felt a flicker of optimism. We were on the path to recovery, and perhaps, just perhaps, we could emerge from this stronger than before. I was ready to face whatever came next, willing to give it everything I had, but with the understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. We were beginning anew, and I just hoped we could navigate the complexities of our relationship without losing sight of what truly mattered. After Melissa sent the message to Adam, it felt like a weight had been lifted, albeit temporarily. I was proud of her for taking that step, but the reality was that we were still very much in the thick of rebuilding our lives. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was beginning to realize the importance of confronting our past head-on, rather than letting it fester in the shadows. The days following her message were filled with anticipation. I kept waiting for a response from Adam, and I could sense the anxiety radiating from Melissa as well. She had put herself out there, and now it was a matter of how he would react. Would he respect her boundaries, or would he try to manipulate the situation further? As we went about our daily routines, I encouraged Melissa to focus on herself and the kids. It was essential for her to reinforce her commitment to our family and, in turn, give me the space to process my own feelings. I wanted her to know that I was rooting for her, and I hoped she could sense my support. Then, the response came. One evening, as we were sitting at the kitchen table, I noticed a shift in Melissa's demeanor. She had received a text from Adam, and I could see the tension in her shoulders immediately. Her face went pale as she read it, and I felt my heart race. "What did he say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she replied, "He wants to meet to talk. He says he's sorry and that he misses our friendship." I felt my stomach drop. "Friendship?" I echoed incredulously. "Melissa, you can't entertain that. He crossed a line with you, and he's trying to manipulate the situation." I know," she said, her voice shaky. "But I just didn't expect him to respond like that. I thought it would be more final." I took a moment to process this. "You need to stand your ground. There's no reason to meet him. You're not obligated to give him any space in your life." Her eyes filled with tears, and I could see the conflict churning within her. "I don't want to seem rude, but I also don't want to go back to that place." "Then don't," I urged. "You've made it clear you've moved on. This is about you reclaiming your life and your boundaries. You don't owe him anything." After a long pause, she nodded, determination replacing the uncertainty in her eyes. "You're right. I'm not going to meet him. I'm done with that chapter of my life." Hearing her say that felt like a turning point. I realized that she was acknowledging the damage her choices had caused, and she was willing to take the necessary steps to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as Melissa began to transform. She committed herself wholeheartedly to therapy, both individually and as a couple. She focused on rebuilding her sense of self, and I could see her confidence blossoming. Meanwhile, I continued to navigate my own feelings. The journey wasn't linear. There were days when I felt stronger and others when the hurt resurfaced. But I found solace in therapy as well, learning to process my emotions and build healthier coping mechanisms. The work we were doing, both individually and together, was challenging. There were moments when old wounds were reopened, but we faced them as a team. Each raw conversation brought us closer to understanding one another, rebuilding the trust that had once seemed impossible to restore. As time went on, we found ourselves developing a new rhythm. We learned to communicate more openly, and I noticed that both of us were gradually moving from a place of hurt to one of hope. We were forging a new narrative, one that didn't ignore the past but instead acknowledged it as part of our journey. One evening, after an especially heartfelt conversation, I looked at Melissa and saw the woman I had fallen in love with, a woman who was fighting for our family, who was willing to put in the work to rebuild what had been lost. I felt a warmth in my heart, and it was the first time in a long while that I believed we might actually come through this together. I know we have a long way to go, I said, holding her hand across the table, but I truly believe we can do this. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to fight for us if you are. I'm in this with you, she replied, her voice steady. I want us to be stronger than we ever were. I'm committed to making it work. It was a moment of clarity, a shared understanding that no matter how hard the path ahead might be, we were choosing to walk it together. The trust wouldn't magically reappear overnight, but we were developing a foundation based on honesty and mutual respect. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow across the room, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We were no longer just two people haunted by betrayal. We were partners, committed to healing and building a future together. In the end, I learned that life is messy, filled with unexpected twists and turns. Betrayal may have shattered our world, but it also presented us with an opportunity, the chance to confront our flaws, rebuild our connection, and emerge stronger than before. As we took those first tentative steps toward rebuilding our marriage, I knew we were still a work in progress. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them, together.